1 in 3 Spanish men carries DNA the Inquisition tried to erase. They have no idea. For 500 years, Spain built its national identity on blood purity. The official history was clear. Spain was a Christian nation, European, Western. Every trace of Moorish and Jewish influence was absorbed into that identity or denied entirely. Catholic, European, untouched by the centuries of Islamic and Jewish presence on the peninsula. They called it limpieza de sangre, purity of blood. Families needed certificates proving no Moorish or Jewish ancestry. Without it, you could not hold office, attend university, or enter the clergy. Investigators called familiars traced family trees back generations, looking for any hint of Jewish or Moorish blood. A single ancestor could disqualify an entire family. The system lasted over 3 centuries. Millions of documents were produced. An entire bureaucracy devoted to proving bloodline purity. And 5 centuries later, genetics proved the entire system was built on a fiction. Spain spent centuries erasing its Moorish and Jewish past. But DNA does not forget. For 700 years, the Iberian Peninsula was home to one of the most diverse civilizations in medieval Europe. Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived side by side. They traded, intermarried, converted, and built cities together. In Toledo, scholars of all 3 faiths translated ancient Greek texts. Their work helped spark the Renaissance. For 700 years, the peninsula was not one culture. It was 3, woven together. The architecture they built still stands. The genetic legacy they left was supposed to have been removed. Millions of tourists visit these monuments. Almost none know what the DNA reveals. In 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella ordered the expulsion of every Jew in Spain. The Alhambra decree gave Jews 4 months to convert to Christianity or leave the country. Between 100,000 and 200,000 Sephardic Jews were expelled. They scattered across the Ottoman Empire, North Africa, Italy, and the Netherlands, communities that still exist today. In Amsterdam, Thessaloniki, and Istanbul, Sephardic communities preserved Ladino, a medieval Spanish language, for over 500 years. But tens of thousands chose to stay. They accepted baptism and became invisible. Thousands more chose baptism to stay. They became conversos, publicly Christian, privately uncertain. The Inquisition was created specifically to monitor them, to test whether their conversion was genuine. Then in 1609, the Moriscos were expelled. The last Muslims forced out of Spain. Between 200,000 and 300,000 Moriscos were forced onto ships and deported to North Africa. Entire villages were emptied overnight. Families that had lived in Spain for centuries were forced out. But again, the purge was not total Moriscos, who had fully assimilated remained. Some were sheltered by local authorities. Spain declared itself purified. The Moors and Jews were gone. The bloodlines were clean. That was the story Spain told itself for 500 years. Then scientists tested the DNA. In 2008, a team of geneticists published a study in the American Journal of Human Genetics. They had tested Y chromosome DNA from over 1,000 men across the Iberian Peninsula and the Balearic Islands. The Y chromosome passes exclusively from father to son. It tracks the paternal line across centuries. Unlike autosomal DNA, which shuffles every generation, the Y chromosome passes intact. It is a direct record of the paternal line. The study sampled men from across the entire peninsula. Every major region was represented. If the expulsions worked, those lineages should be gone. They tested for exactly that. They searched for 2 specific markers, haplogroups common in North African populations and haplogroups common in Sephardic Jewish populations. If Spain had truly purged its Moorish and Jewish genetic heritage, these markers should appear at near 0 frequency. The results were not close to 0. The numbers were so high that the researchers, they used multiple reference populations from North Africa and the Sephardic diaspora to calibrate the estimates. Nearly 20% of Spanish men carried Sephardic Jewish Y chromosomes. Another 11% carried North African Y chromosomes, lineages directly traceable to Moorish-era populations. Combined, roughly 1 in 3 Iberian men carry paternal genetic markers from the population Spain tried to erase. Walk down any street in Madrid, Seville, or Lisbon. Statistically, every third man you pass carries this ancestry. They are teachers, lawyers, farmers, and doctors. Catholic families with Spanish surnames stretching back centuries. Their official identity is entirely Spanish. Their genetic identity tells a more complex story. And most of them have absolutely no idea. The DNA was never part of the conversation. 500 years of blood purity laws. And the DNA is still there. The explanation is straightforward. The expulsions were never total. When the Alhambra decree was issued, tens of thousands of Jews chose baptism over exile. They became conversos, new Christians. Their names changed, their public worship changed, but their Y chromosomes did not change. Their sons carried the same paternal lineage as their grandfathers. Many converso families maintained Jewish practices in secret for generations, behind locked doors and shuttered windows. The Inquisition hunted them relentlessly, but the families that survived passed their lineages forward. You can change a name. You can change a religion. You cannot change a Y. The same was true for the Moriscos. Hundreds of thousands converted to Christianity decades before the final expulsion. Their descendants intermarried with old Christian families for generations before 1609. The geographic pattern matches history. Southern and western Spain, where Moorish rule lasted longest, shows the highest North African DNA frequency. Andalusia, the region that was Islamic for nearly 8 centuries. Cordoba alone was once the largest city in Western Europe. Its population was majority Muslim for 500 years. That level of sustained population contact leaves an indelible genetic signature. The land remembers, even when the culture was erased. The genes followed the geography. But here is the twist. The study also revealed something that complicates the narrative. Some of this DNA did not arrive with the North African and Iberian populations have been exchanging genes for thousands of years, long before Islam existed. The Strait of Gibraltar is only 14 kilometers wide. Humans have been crossing it for millennia. Phoenician traders established colonies on both sides. Roman armies moved North African soldiers into Iberian garrisons. So not all of the North African DNA in modern Spain arrived with the Moorish invasion of 711. Genetic dating methods can estimate when the admixture occurred. Some segments are far older than the Islamic period. This means the full story is even more layered than the simple narrative of Moorish conquest and expulsion. Iberia and North Africa have been exchanging genes since the Stone Age. The Strait of Gibraltar was never a barrier. On a clear day, you can see Africa from Spain. They have always been neighbors. But the Sephardic signal is cleaner. That ancestry arrived during the Roman and medieval periods. Jews had lived in Iberia since at least the Roman period, nearly 1,500 years before the expulsion. They built synagogues, served as physicians and translators, and became deeply embedded in Iberian society. The genetic imprint of 15 centuries of continuous habitation cannot be erased by a single decree. Recent excavations of medieval Jewish cemeteries across Spain are now providing ancient DNA to complement the modern genetic data. Every skeleton tested adds another data point to the story of how deeply embedded these communities were. A follow-up study in 2008 by Capelli and colleagues confirmed the pattern using different markers. Independent labs using different methods reached the same conclusion. The genetic legacy is real and measurable. Portugal showed the same pattern. The expulsions there mirrored Spain's, and so did the genetic survival. Across the entire Iberian Peninsula, the same hidden ancestry persists in the same proportions. But here is where it becomes personal. Most carriers have no idea. Modern consumer DNA tests are now revealing these hidden ancestries to ordinary Spanish families. Families with centuries of Catholic identity are discovering North African and Jewish genetic markers they never expected. The surnames are Spanish. The religion is Catholic. The culture is entirely European. But the Y chromosome tells a different story. one that 500 years could not erase. The Inquisition ran for over 350 years. It employed thousands of investigators. It maintained files on hundreds of thousands of families. It tortured and executed thousands of conversos accused of practicing Judaism in secret. And despite all of that, the genetic markers survived. They passed quietly from father to son across 20 generations. The Inquisition could inspect beliefs. It could monitor church attendance. It could burn books. Over its 350-year history, the Spanish Inquisition prosecuted over 150,000 cases. Defendants were interrogated about their private religious practices, their eating habits, their household customs, refusing to eat pork, changing bed linens on Fridays, lighting candles at sundown. Any of these could trigger an investigation. Thousands were executed. Tens of thousands were punished with fines, imprisonment, or public humiliation. But it could not see a chromosome. And it could not stop fathers from having sons. The limpieza de sangre system was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how ancestry works. The certificates checked family names and parish records. They checked who married whom in church. But conversion does not change DNA. Intermarriage spreads it further. 5 centuries of intermarriage distributed the markers across all social classes. Even in northern Spain, where Moorish rule was briefest, the Sephardic signal is present. The kingdom of Asturias, the heartland of the Reconquista, where Christian Spain claimed its purest roots. Even here, the genetic markers are present. The Converso families dispersed throughout the entire peninsula. The enforcers of blood purity may have carried the very ancestry they persecuted. This changes how Spain understands itself. The country is not and has never been genetically homogeneous. The 3 cultures that medieval Spaniards called convivencia, the coexistence, left a mark that no decree could erase. Christian, Muslim, and Jewish families exchanged genes for over 1,000 years. The next generation of Spanish geneticists is mapping this legacy in unprecedented detail. Ancient DNA from medieval and early modern cemeteries will soon reveal exactly when and where each wave of admixture occurred. The conversion and intermarriage that the Inquisition tried to reverse had already distributed those lineages too widely to be removed. The genes had already mixed. The children had already been born. No law could undo biology. The architecture tells the same story. Christian churches built on mosque foundations. Mudajar art blending both traditions. Spain's genetic identity is not European or Moorish or Jewish. It is all 3 at once. Every generation that passes spreads those markers further through the population. Young Spaniards taking DNA tests are discovering ancestry no history class ever taught. For many, it is the first time they have ever considered that their family history might include non-European roots. The reaction is almost always the same: surprise, then curiosity, then a question about what else they do not know. The textbooks told one story, the DNA tells another, and neither version is complete without the other. A new generation of historians is now integrating genetic evidence into the standard curriculum. The DNA is becoming part of the story Spain tells about itself, slowly but irreversibly. And with every new ancient DNA study, the picture becomes more detailed. Burial sites across Spain are being sampled. Medieval cemeteries, Islamic tombs, Jewish necropolises. Ancient DNA from these sites will directly compare medieval populations to their modern descendants. The technology now exists to trace individual family lineages across the conversion boundary. Each skeleton adds another layer to the genetic history of a peninsula that was never as pure as its rulers claimed. The children walking through these halls carry the DNA of every culture that built them. 14 kilometers of water, 1,000 years of shared history, and a genetic bond that no decree could sever. What else has been buried in the DNA of nations that claimed purity? Spain is not the only one. Every country with a history of persecution carries hidden genetic legacies from the populations it tried to erase. The Inquisition is over. The DNA survived. And now everyone can see it. If you have made it this far, consider subscribing. Most of our viewers are not subscribed yet. Sources are linked in the description. We will see you in the next one.